A few weeks back, Ubisoft announced that a couple of its older games will be shutting down their multiplayer servers at the end of August. They published quite a long list, which I will be linking in the description of the video. This is mostly concerning PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 and obviously the PC versions of these games, but there are also some Wii U ports too. The most prominent games are probably the different Assassin's Creed games, and games like Far Cry 3 or Splinter Cell Blacklist. That is why today we're going to take a look at those and find out how much they're still being played and whether it is worth playing them again or purchasing them for the first time before the shutdown. That being said, all of the mentioned games are primarily single player games and certainly already worth picking up for their story campaigns alone. I've been testing all of these games on the PlayStation 3, but I would assume somewhat similar results for the other ports as well. Xbox 360 multiplayer is, unlike the PlayStation 3, not available for free, but the games are usually compatible with Xbox Ones and Xbox Series X, which overall should even itself out. Let's start with Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and that unfortunately also means to start with bad news. Of all the AC games with multiplayer support, Brotherhood is unfortunately by far the least played in 2022. Nearly every time I queued outside of peak times, I couldn't find any players. On occasion I could find a second player, but it seems nearly impossible to randomly find enough players for a match during the day. At peak times, especially on the weekend, your chances of getting into a match will significantly improve, but I still could only do so a couple of times. Brotherhood requires at least 6 players to start a match, which is more than the other AC games. Brotherhood will also make it much harder to find a match if you have any of the multiplayer DLC activated, so you better make sure to deactivate them before you queue or not install them in the first place. Overall, the multiplayer of AC Brotherhood on PlayStation 3 is clearly lacking of players in comparison to the other AC games. The multiplayer situation is looking a lot better in Assassin's Creed Revelations. During peak times you will usually be able to choose between 2 to 3 different lobbies and they normally fill up quite quickly. All game modes and maps rotate and there's generally a good mix of veteran and new players who want to try the game out before it closes down. You will even sometimes find other players for the DLC maps, but most of them are just here to complete the trophies. Nothing wrong with that, and the regular lobbies usually consist of real matches and not boosting groups. Even outside of peak times, AC Revelations usually finds at least one decent lobby. Interestingly enough, the PC version of AC Revelations will, unlike its console counterparts, not shut down at the end of the month. I'm not really sure why that is, but it must be really popular on PC. For Assassin's Creed 3, the situation is quite similar to AC Revelations. There are usually a couple of lobbies available and I never had problems getting matches for the various game modes and maps. Assassin's Creed 3 also has an additional PvE co-op mode called Wolf Pack, in which you work together with other players to eliminate NPC targets as fast as possible and complete as many rounds as you can. Wolf Pack obviously has less players than the regular multiplayer, but you will still easily find lobbies for it too. Overall, the multiplayer situation is still looking quite good for AC3. The PvP multiplayer in Assassin's Creed 4 and the co-op modes of Assassin's Creed Unity are not affected by any shutdowns. Those servers remain online and playable for the foreseeable future. I would even go as far as to assume that they will remain playable for at least another 2 years, maybe even significantly longer. But don't quote me on that, I'm just guessing like everyone else. But if they wanted to shut them down as well, then they would have probably already done so. I would assume that a lot of the fans of the classic AC multiplayer and Brotherhood Revelations and 3 will probably switch to Assassin's Creed 4 and increase its popularity in the next time. Far Cry 3 still has a small but dedicated multiplayer community. Till recently I didn't even know that Far Cry 3 had PvP multiplayer, but thankfully you will still be able to experience it in the next weeks. Normally you will find full lobbies during peak times and at least a couple of players outside of them. Far Cry 3 also has an additional co-op campaign that can be completed with up to 3 other online players. During peak times I could find a couple of other players, but during downtimes I couldn't find any comrades. The co-op missions and PvP multiplayer are not included in the Far Cry 3 Classic Edition on modern consoles, and therefore multiplayer won't be playable anymore after the end of August. The co-op missions, on the other hand, will still be able to be completed in offline split screen. The improvement and upgrade of your weapons and gear in the co-op missions, however, is linked to your online progression and will therefore very likely not be available after the shutdown, which is a bit of a letdown. Splinter Cell Blacklist is the last Splinter Cell game with official multiplayer servers, but it is going to change at the end of the month. There are not many players left on the online servers, but you will sometimes be able to find a match in Team Deathmatch or Extraction. This however is really rare and it only happens during peak times. The other multiplayer game modes are not being played at all. You can sometimes find people for the co-op mode, where you can play selected missions with other players. There are however not too many players queuing for co-op missions either. On the bright side, you will at least be able to access all the co-op content via offline split screen even after the server shutdown. Now let's take a quick look back at our Ubisoft's list of death. Some of the other more prominent games are Recon Future Soldier and Driver San Francisco. I own neither of these games, so I can't tell you much about the level of activity going on in them. According to PSN profiles, however, there are a bunch of people still unlocking multiplayer trophies in those games, so you might be able to find public lobbies in them. That being said, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood also has plenty of people unlocking multiplayer trophies, and I very much struggled with finding public lobbies, so there might also only be boosting groups in Driver San Francisco and Ghost Recon, but who knows. Recon Future Soldier seems to additionally have server issues, like so many Ubisoft games, where you never know whether the servers are gonna let you play today or not. The last gen versions of Rayman Legends are also losing their online support for challenge cups, which for example are needed to be completed to unlock all trophies. All the other games on the list are mainly featuring PC versions and them losing their online functions. Most audacious is actually the fact that you will apparently not be able to re-download and play single-player DLC for the older Assassin's Creed games, which makes absolutely no sense. This however doesn't concern the console versions of the games. Those single-player DLC will remain playable and re-downloadable because they are stored in a serious console store from Sony or Microsoft. Uplay however doesn't seem to be a serious launcher, because otherwise those DLC would remain accessible. I have plenty of delisted PC games from Steam and I never had an issue to re-download or play them. Ubisoft is honestly embarrassing themselves by being too incompetent to design a halfway acceptable game store. If you can't let players access their bored single-player offline content, then you should just release your games on Steam or any other of the more competent platforms like the Epic Game Store or even Origin.
Any initial comments?
I don't know. It's unfortunate.
In any case, that was a short overview of the older Ubisoft games that will shut down their multiplayer components at the end of the month. You still have around 3 weeks left if you want to hop back on or experience them for the first time in 2022. Thanks for watching the video and hopefully see you in the next one.